Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this special webinar to honour the work of Professor John Lazarus and his remarkable contribution to the field of thyroid disease. We're absolutely delighted that so many of John's friends and colleagues have joined us here today. My name is Julia Priestley, and I'm the CEO of the British Thyroid Foundation, or the BTF. For those of you who don't know the BTF, we're a charity which provides information and peer support for people living with thyroid disease. We raise awareness about thyroid health, and we do what we can to fund and to support research that will improve understanding, care and treatments for those who are affected. The BTF was founded in 1991 by Mrs. Janice Hickey, who was introduced to John in the early days of the charity. And for more than 30 years, we've had the remarkably good fortune to have his support and guidance. Over that time, he's played an important role as a medical advisor, a trustee. He's helped develop our pregnancy and iodine projects. And for the last decade, we're very proud that John has been one of our patrons. Quite simply, without John and his generosity, insight and dedication, our small charity would not have been able to grow and achieve all it has done for thyroid patients and for those who care for them. So it's a real pleasure for us to host this webinar this evening and to bring together such eminent and international names in the thyroid world to honour John's contributions. For those of you in the audience who have your own recollections and experiences of working with John, please do share them in the chat on your screen. We really would love to hear them. So now, to introduce you to our speakers and to the man of the evening, I'll hand you over to one of the BTF's current trustees, Professor Marion Ludgate, who's a retired research scientist and has worked with John at Cardiff for much of her own career in molecular endocrinology. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you very much, Julia. And indeed, thank you to Julia, Joe, and everybody at the BTF for everything that you've done to make this webinar possible. And a quick little word, donations are always welcome to try and keep this flagship patient support group afloat. But now let's think about what we plan to do this evening. And this is to honour the work of Professor John Lazarus, as Julia has already told you. A little later, we're going to hear from friends and colleagues of John's who are going to discuss the four main areas in which he's made seminal contributions. But before that, for about 15 minutes, we're going to share a conversation that I had with John a few days ago about other aspects of his remarkable life. So good evening, John.
Hello, Marion.
In the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to go on a whistle-stop tour of your life, just like in This Is Your Life. So I think it's fair to say, first and foremost, you are a physician. So what I'd like you to do is just explain a little bit about your experiences as a medical student.
Oh, well, I was a medical student in two universities, Cambridge and Glasgow, but Glasgow was the clinical part. And that was really what you joined medical school for, at least what I did, to treat patients. And Glasgow was a huge medical school and with a huge number of patients and lots of hospitals which we visited. And so the experience was excellent. And eventually I graduated.
So you went from Mr. John Lazarus to Dr. John Lazarus.
Indeed, yes.
Perfect. And I think you mentioned that you were inspired really by two people at that time, Graham Wilson and Donald Alexander.
That's right. Although they were, Graham Wilson was preceded by Sir Edward Wayne, but he had just retired when I joined the department. And Donald Alexander had been there a long time, and it was quite well known in the thyroid field, and different personalities, obviously. And Graham Wilson was quite well known in the thyroid field too. He died prematurely, very sadly, and Donald is not alive anymore, but did a full span. And also there were a huge number of thyroid interested people in the Department of Medicine in the Western Infirmary in Glasgow.
So that was fantastic as an experience for you. But I guess before long, you moved from being the person doing the listening to the person doing the speaking. So you've done quite a lot of training of medical students yourself, haven't you?
Oh yes, yes, lots of teaching of all sorts. But I like round the bedside the best.
Round the bedside, but I think you were also involved with discussions about the curriculum. Is that right?
Yes, yes, I did. Um, and when I came down to Cardiff, I was put on the curriculum committee. Um, so yes, it was very rewarding. Not always, but
Excellent, excellent. So that was at the level of undergraduates, but I think you've also been very involved in teaching the next generations of thyroidologists, and apparently you star in some videos for the MRCP. Can you think of any of those?
yes, I remember them. They're not all thyroid medicine. There are all sorts of medicine. Um, and I made most of them down here in Cardiff, and they were sent to um, other countries and so on for aspiring physicians how to examine whatever. And so that was very good.
Excellent.
And yes, and I made a lot of slideshows as well about that.
And it's interesting because you say about slides. There was a person called Ronald Harden who,
Indeed.
yeah, who I think was very helpful to you. How did he help?
Well, he was firstly very helpful in the research aspect, and we were doing salivary gland physiology then. And then he got very interested in medical education, and so he toned down his clinical research thing, and he went to Dundee. And I haven't seen him for a long time, but I did see him on some webinar or other. And he's a bit senior to me, uh, but he certainly, one amusing thing, he had a room next to mine in Glasgow in the Department of Medicine, but you had to phone to make an appointment to see him. He was so busy.
That sounds very good. So obviously you've been teaching people at all levels. You've also been an examiner at all levels as well, probably in the UK, overseas.
Yes, I think the main examining later in life was for the membership of the Royal College of Physicians, and you can do that for London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. I did it for Edinburgh and Glasgow, which meant I could go up there and see the family and so on. So I did that for a long time actually, and that was very enjoyable.
Excellent, excellent. So that's one very big and important part of being a physician. But the other is clinical practice. And you've talked to me about how you think it's so important to have joint clinics.
Yes, indeed. I've realized that more and more as I've got older, because if you, for instance, run a clinic with a surgeon and you get his input and a physician's input, and they're not necessarily the same, so you arrive at a compromise solution, and that's, I think, very valuable for the patient. So I did one for thyroid disease, um, and one for the thyroid eye disease, and one for obstetric endocrinology, as it were. So those three areas were very useful, and
And
um, the people that were running the clinic, like the obstetrician, they found it very useful, and so did the person with who was doing thyroid eye disease, an
excellent,
ophthalmologist.
excellent.
So
So the patient benefited, but I think you commented that the surgeon always had the larger consulting room. Is that the fact?
well, yes, that's a historic fact because his predecessor had that room.
Okay.
So he just moved in there, and I was the little boy in the smaller room. But I don't mind.
Okay, excellent. So we've talked a little bit about being a medical student, training, clinical practice, you've done quite a lot of research as well, and you describe your first experience of research as killing rats in Colombia. Now, you weren't a vermin expert, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it wasn't the first experience, actually. The first experience of research was when I joined the department of medicine in the Western Infirmary, and they showed me to my office, and all that was in the office was a dental chair, because I had to collect saliva from different patients and measure things. So that was the introduction to research. But eventually, when I came here, I got the research job in Columbia University, and well, we were looking at the action of thyroid hormone, and a lot of people thought it was primarily in the nucleus, and it may well have been, but my boss, Kenneth Sterling, identified a receptor in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. So I joined him, and there was another chap there, and we worked on that.
Excellent.
So that was very interesting. I learned a lot.
And a publication in Science as well, which is first class, really
Two,
first class.
Actually.
Two, fantastic, fantastic. So I think your first paper was round about 1967.
That's right.
You're still going strong.
No, it wasn't. It was 69, actually.
Okay, but you're still going strong. So quite a long time
Yes,
doing
quite
research
a long
publications.
time with publications, absolutely. And they weren't all thyroid. There was some general medicine, there was medical education, there was this and that, you know.
Excellent. So your working career, really, is it fair to say that you are a Celtic doctor? You've worked in Edinburgh and Glasgow and Wales, so you're a Celtic doctor. Is that true?
Yes, I mean, Edinburgh was just examining, not seeing patients there.
Okay.
But I was in Glasgow for 5 years, 6 years actually, after qualifying, where I saw patients, and then down here with a break of 15 months for Columbia University, New York.
Excellent. So apparently you retired in 2007.
Yes.
I wonder whether Mo noticed any difference at all when you retired.
Well, I had a very good retirement, so I was quite busy, and I then started to, without going into details with all the different things I did, but I started to travel quite a lot, because various people in pharmaceutical companies asked me to speak abroad, you know, in all sorts of places, which was of course an attraction. So I did that, and then COVID came and I stopped all that, and I'm not going to restart now.
But I think that when you retired, obviously you had to complete the CAT study, but
Yes.
also you spent 8 years as regional coordinator of the Iodine Global Network.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. For Europe.
For Europe.
500 million people. So that was very enjoyable. I learned a lot about nutrition, because there were only 2 or 3 doctors, medical doctors, on the board of that, and so I learned quite a lot about nutrition and etc. But I decided just before COVID that enough was enough, and I resigned. So, end of story. Before that, I had worked for Tenevis, which was a cancer charity in Cardiff, and I learned a lot there as well about the third sector and so on, and became vice chairman of the board of trustees, and that was very enjoyable.
Excellent. And I think it's a very good example that you can keep learning irrespective of the age that you are. There's always something new to learn.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. I feel that I should have gone back to college or university to do something, but it just didn't fit. So I never did.
So you're involved really with quite a lot of organisations. We've mentioned the Iodine Global Network. I think at the same time you're involved with the UK Iodine Group, the ETA. You were really quite a big cheese in the ETA.
Yes, eventually becoming the secretary-treasurer, because the whole ETA, the European Thyroid Association, wasn't that big in those days, just around the turn of the millennium. So I had to run the treasury and the administration, and in fact run the for various reasons, run the annual meeting in Cardiff, which was also mostly very enjoyable. So yes, but I'd been a Welsh representative on the Iodine Global Network since it was founded in the 80s at some time or other. I think 86. I can't quite remember.
It's all fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about people who inspired you. I wonder if you realise just how many people you have inspired. And I mean, Prem and I are two prime examples. So we were very pleased to organise your fest trip some years ago.
Oh, indeed.
Here we are again organising an opportunity to really say, well done, John. But I was just looking through some of the papers. Penny Owen, Bucci, Gerardo, Amal, Kofi, Savim, Chelsea, so many young people who
Yes.
came on various schemes and who
Yes.
really were inspired by you. So that's brilliant, really brilliant. So, finally, and perhaps most importantly, you're a family man.
Yes.
So you've been married quite a long time.
Quite a long time.
Quite
Yes.
a long time. Where did you meet Mo?
In a pub.
In a pub. Excellent.
I was a final year medical student and I'd done quite well in a module of general medicine, and I had a co-student who became a surgeon, but he also did well, and we decided that we deserved a drink that Friday lunchtime. So we went to a well-known pub in Glasgow University area, and these ladies were there, and one of them became my wife.
A very auspicious day. So obviously you've got children. I understand Jenny and Tracy have the same birthday, just 1 year apart.
That's correct.
That sounds very busy.
It was.
And then not long afterwards you have your son Simon.
Yes. Well, he was conceived in America, but we decided to come home because we thought better a British Prime Minister than an American president. But, you know, I don't know. Anyway, that's what happened.
Excellent. And then, of course, you have a granddaughter.
Yes, we have
Who's
one
what?
granddaughter, Sophia, who is extremely bright in our opinion, and but isn't a scientist really. She's a linguist. So, although she's only 15 and a half, but she'll do very well, I'm sure.
That's excellent. So that's fantastic, John. Shall we listen to what the others have to say about you? Thank you. So, I'm very pleased to have shared that with everybody. And now it's time to start with some of the very important scientific contributions that John has made. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce Professor Luigi Bartolena from the University of Insubria in Varese, and a long-standing member of UGOGO. And Luigi is going to very kindly tell us about some of the work that John did on lithium and also what he did with thyroid eye disease in UGOGO. Luigi, over to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, I can see my screen. I shared my screen, but I don't see it.
So I don't know if Joe can help. We did see it when it was several slides.
Yes.
So Joe, I don't know if you can help.
Just do full screen.
Yeah, I
Perfect.
did.
That's great. That works. We can see that.
Can you see it?
Yep, it's all good.
I don't see it, but I remember my slides. So it's really a great privilege and pleasure to um, participate in this tribute to John Lazarus. We have been good friends for many years. He has been an excellent scientist, clinician, and teacher, and we have shared many experiences within the European Thyroid Association. I don't see my slides, so that's really a pity. But in the next slide, can you see the next slide with the picture?
We can see them.
Yeah, but I don't see the screen. Can you help me with that? You see that around the table, you can recognize John speaking, and Peter Smith, and Ulla Felder-Rasmussen, and Wilma Wiesinger, and and Ennio Martino just preparing the ETA anniversary book. You can see, I can't see, but you can see that we were all very serious. I don't know why, probably because all the drinks on the table were absolutely alcohol free. Then move to next slide. John made a lot of contributions in the field of lithium effects on thyroid pathophysiology and physiology, and this ended up with a number of publications that you see enlisted here, because this is an animated slide. Please tell me when we go to the end and we move to the next slide.
That's the next slide now.
Okay, so John made important contributions in this field. He started working in this field many years ago, and he just contributed quite a lot to demonstrate the effects of lithium on physiology. It's a goitrogenic effect, and the effect that in patients with bipolar disorders, lithium had in terms of goiter, which was and which is a very frequent event, and hypothyroidism. And also demonstrated that lithium contributed to enhance thyroid autoimmunity, especially not quite directly causing it, but just in exacerbating thyroid autoimmunity in patients who already had thyroid autoimmune phenomena. And another important aspect of John's studies on lithium was that lithium, because of its main effect in terms of blockade of thyroid hormone release from the thyroid gland, might be a useful adjunct in the treatment of hyperthyroidism due to Graves' disease, and might also be used to allow treatment with radioiodine by lengthening staying of radioactive iodine within the thyroid. I'm sorry, I'm almost blind with this presentation. So I guess that what you see now is a slide from UGOGO group. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this is a nice picture coming from the Essen meeting in the UGOGO meeting in Essen, Germany. You can see in this slide John and Carol Lane and Marian Ludgate from Cardiff. In the back, you can see Petrus Petrus and Chris Snair from Newcastle. And you can recognize also Vilmar Vinsinga, Claudio Marcocci, Giorgia Cali, among others. And this participation in UGOGO activities resulted in a number of important publications. Actually, you see here a small recollection of these papers in which John had an important contribution. Tell me when I'm at the end.
Yes, the slide is showing John's contributions to the field of TED.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is my last slide, which summarizes the important role that John has had in the field of thyroid eye disease, which I prefer to call Graves' orbitopathy. And you see that he was one of the founder of UGOGO. He contributed substantially to establish how to assess patients with thyroid eye disease and how to evaluate treatment outcomes. He participated in a number of important clinical studies and trials, which were actually the first run in the field of Graves' orbitopathy. And lastly, but most importantly, he was an excellent teacher and contributed to disseminate through teaching courses throughout Europe to teach how to assess patients with Graves with thyroid eye disease and to establish the fundamental role of a multidisciplinary approach to the treatment of this disease. I think that John's contributions were really very important. So sorry because I didn't see my slides, but hope you did them. And thank you very much, John, for what you did.
Thank you very much, Luigi. And in fact, I think that a number of people in the chat have said that if you have a problem seeing slides, if you leave and rejoin, then they are visible. So, in fact, I'm now going to welcome Professor Peter Smith from Dublin. And he apparently says he's not so much going to ask questions and discuss as perhaps just insult John. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Luigi. I've known John for about 40 years, in fact, over 40 years. And during that time, we've collaborated. But the main thing that I've noticed is his evolution into a giant of thyroid research, both clinical and basic research, with a prodigious output of papers. It's really, his contributions have been quite outstanding. We have served together on the European Thyroid Association for many, many years. Our collaboration involved quite a number of field trips, both in Africa and in Sri Lanka, as well as in the UK and in Ireland. And whatever about the scientific output, they were great fun. The one thing you would remember was great fun. And part of, as this picture will demonstrate, as part of the benefits of getting to know John with the privilege of meeting up with his lovely wife, Maureen. Now, Mo and John, seeing in this picture, Deirdre and I, my wife Deirdre, and Ian and Eileen Hay from the Mayo Clinic, we became very good friends at thyroid meetings all over, in our own homes and on holidays. So we've got to know each other very well. And as you can see from the table there, we were not quite abstemious in terms of either food or drink. That's something that we have continued throughout the years. So I'm not going to take up any more time, just to say it's been a great privilege, John, and a pleasure to have worked with you and to have known you as a friend, and Mo. So, ad multos annos. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. And I think that in the interests of giving other people an opportunity to talk about the topics that were given to them as well, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is my co-conspirator, Professor Lakdasa Premawardana from the Cardiff Thyroid Group. So over to you, Prem.
Thank you very much, Marion. And I'm deeply privileged to be able to pay tribute to John and his work on postpartum thyroiditis. As many of you know, John's been my guru and mentor for nearly 35 years here in Cardiff. Now, postpartum thyroiditis was first described by Roberton in 1948 in the British Medical Journal, and Amino alluded to the link PPT had to TPO antibody in his studies in 1976. Now, John tells me that he's much younger than these two individuals, so his research into PPT started in the late 80s and in the early 90s. Next slide, please, Joe. Now, John's, as Peter mentioned there, John's had an enormous output of research papers, and in PPT it's the same. If you key in John Lazarus into PubMed, you'll find that there are 39 papers, 25 of them pure research, 12 were reviews, and 2 were contributions to guidelines from the ATA and the Endocrine Society. Now, this is not taking into account the many book chapters and other published contributions that John made to the topic over the years. If you ask him, he'll tell you that the late, great Reg Hall was his inspiration. And when he set up the clinic in Cuffley Miners Hospital, which is about 10 miles out of Cardiff, John took it over when Reg retired. And also Alan McGregor, who was Reg's partner in those days in the study of PPT, when he moved on to London. So John took over the clinic and the whole set of studies into PPT. Now, he's a very modest man, and he will not tell you that in 2023, when Angela Leung wrote her paper on landmark discoveries in maternal fetal thyroid disease, over the past century, mind you, over the past century, John's PPT studies were mentioned, and in particular, the one that referred to a 70% recurrence rate in subjects who'd had previous PPT. Next paragraph, please, Joe. Next slide, Darrell. I had the chance in preparation for this talk to talk to John and ask him what his most important papers were out of the 24 or 25 we mentioned. He mentioned the one in QJM in 1996, where he described the clinical spectrum of PPT when he studied 152 TPO antibody positive and 239 antibody negative patients for 1 year postpartum. And he showed that there were 3 types of PPT, with about a third having a biphasic illness, which is demonstrated in the figure on the right. He also studied the role of complement in the pathogenesis of PPT, which he reported in the EJE in 1995, where he showed that complement C3 activation and bioactive TPO antibody increased during this postpartum period. So thereby telling us that there was a a mechanistic autoimmune mechanism rather in the development of PPT in these patients. He also studied later on in the JCE TPO antibody fingerprints in a longitudinal study in PPT and showed that those who had PPT had a different TPO antibody fingerprint compared to those who didn't, and thereby implying that there probably was a genetic element to all this. Next slide, please, Joe. But then if you talk to him in an unguarded moment about his most significant contributions to PPT, he will tell you that one of the most important things he did was he highlighted its clinical importance. In the 80s and in the 90s and even later on, PPT was a largely unrecognized illness and even denied by many endocrinologists. I remember many ATA and BTA and ETA meetings at which, when we presented, there were lots of questions about whether PPT was a real illness. But I think he dispelled that myth. He also showed that the incidence of PPT was 5% or more, and very importantly, that about 50% of patients who had PPT will end up having long-term hypothyroidism. And as I mentioned previously, he also showed that there were postpartum immune changes that contributed to the development of PPT. But above all, I think he will admit that training and fostering international collaborators, as Marion mentioned before, was also one of his major achievements. And I can mention 3 individuals who took part in some of the PPT studies: Fawaz Amari from Jordan, Sakina Othman from Malaysia, and Gerardo Mazziotti from Italy. And they were all trained and fostered by John Lazarus. So his contribution to PPT didn't extend only to the science part of it. I'd like to also mention that he had collaborators in this exercise: Arthur Parks, Brian Harris, Lynn Taylor, Hayden Adams, Rhys John, and yours truly. Next slide, please, Joe. Now, these are 3 slides I've taken from our many trips to Sri Lanka, ostensibly to study iodine nutrition. But as you can see in the picture on the right, John Laz was impeccably dressed. Despite the 40-degree heat of Colombo, he wore his light blue suit and looked very smart. And there I was, looking rather rotund, but at John's side. So John, thank you very much for all you've done and for your enormous contribution to the study of postpartum thyroiditis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prem. And I'm now very pleased to welcome Dr. Chris Popp, who is the current secretary of the ETA, and he's going to discuss some of these findings and research of John with you. Chris, are you there?
Good evening. I hope you hear me.
Yes, we do.
So hi, John and Marion. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. Many great presentations until now. So I cannot tell stories about John like the previous speakers, of course. Just a few words. So he was my predecessor as ETA secretary. And he's not the only one this evening. We also have Luigi and Ulla, who had this position. But anyway, in the past, we gave some lectures together at different conferences, which was always great fun, I have to say. And it was much in keeping with John's period of postpartum thyroiditis. So we liked each other, and we teased each other by saying we always gave the same talk. But John added in his typical humor that I always change the colors of my slides. So this was always very nice to have these kind of discussions with him. So now to be serious, you were asking me to prepare some very tough questions on postpartum thyroiditis. So I prepared some, but I won't ask them to John, of course, but I'm sure that Prem would like to have some questions. Aren't you, Prem?
I don't know, Gustav. It depends on the question.
It was, of course, also a little joke, but maybe one for the audience. Is there any evidence now on the prevention of postpartum thyroiditis?
I think there have been studies looking at iodine and thyroxine in TPO antibody positive women, and the jury's out. I don't think there's good evidence to suggest that either of them prevents PPT. But there is emerging evidence about selenium, and there's a theoretical possibility that selenium does interfere with the immune mechanisms of PPT. And I think there are 2 or 3 studies, two from China, two from Italy, and one from the UK, which suggested that selenium may indeed be able to prevent and reduce TPO antibody concentrations if given early. That's as much as I know, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Prem. This is very interesting. I don't see questions in the chat, so
yeah, I think to be honest, it would probably be good if there are other questions, maybe we could have them a little bit later. So maybe it would be a good idea if we could now move on to the next topic, which is a topic very, very close to John's heart, which is, of course, iodine. And we're delighted that we've got a former president of the BTA, an author of one of the most highly cited papers in thyroidology to present this, Dr. Mark Vanderpump. Mark, over to you.
So thank you, Marion. I'm assuming you can hear me okay. So my brief was to present a brief summary of John's significant contribution to the world of iodine, which evolved, as has been described, as a major project rather later in his career. So next slide, please, Julia. So I had the honour of speaking at John's Festrit in 2008, at which there appeared, as John was describing, little evidence that he was slowing down. And since then, there's been more of a sense of a Bob Dylan's never-ending tour rather than an Oasis reunion after 20 years. I remember commenting in my speech on the sales figures of the endocrine effects of lithium, which weren't very high, as you can imagine, and was pleased to see on Amazon that it's still in print. But I note that he's added his autobiography called The Thyroid Man, published last year. So I would urge you all to purchase that to contribute to John's retirement. The iodide concentrated mechanism was the subject of his MD in 1974. And as part of this process, Marion had forwarded John's CV, which contained in total 467 publications, of which I looked at 286 are cited on PubMed. So I went through and excluded any reference to Peter Smith or the Irish Times, and I was left with 60 significant iodine relevant publications, many including epidemiological studies in Senegal, Sri Lanka, and Cardiff. Post-retirement, in 2012, John was appointed as the regional coordinator for Western Central Europe for the control of iodine deficiency disorders global network, and he was a founder member of the multidisciplinary UK iodine group. Next slide, please. So John's contribution to iodine can be summarized into 3 broad categories. One was the recognition of the possibility of iodine deficiency in the UK, subsequently confirmed in a UK national survey supported by sorted by the BTF, with Janice Hickey playing a key role. He engaged with politicians, including an appearance at a House of Lords Select Committee, and had the thankless task of trying to encourage the Scientific Advisory Group on Nutrition to make iodine deficiency a national priority. He led the discussion on the possible means of safely increasing the iodine intake of the UK population. As part of his more regional role, he led the European response to data suggesting persistent significant iodine deficiency in Europe, with only a minority of current countries having mandatory salt iodization. And he worked tirelessly to try and raise an awareness of the importance of IDD prevention programs. He was instrumental in recognizing and describing the impact of even mild iodine deficiency on fetal neurodevelopment, including importance of minor changes in free T4 levels in the first trimester, and the impact and potential benefit of iodine supplementation. In Sri Lanka, he was involved in obtaining longitudinal data, always difficult in epidemiological studies, of changes in thyroid autoimmune markers during salt order iodization, and providing reassurance of the absence of any sustained clinical or biochemical impact. Next slide, please. So finally, I would just like to leave you with this photo of John with Peter Smith, taken at the ETA in Gateshead in 2018. It was obviously in the days pre-Ozempic and Mounjaro, but it captures, I think, John's personality, human charm, but most of all, his ability to be an academic leader and to be such a strong presence in our professional careers. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That was great. And who better to discuss this topic with you than Elizabeth Pierce, Professor of Medicine at the Boston University and School of Medicine, and of course the Regional Coordinator for the Iodine Global Network for North America. Elizabeth, welcome.
So it's an enormous pleasure to be joining all of you here today. I have known John for many years as a friend, as a colleague, as a mentor. We have worked together at the Iodine Global Network for many years, and he also co-authored the American Thyroid Association Thyroid and Pregnancy Guidelines in 2017, which involved quite a few years of work together, which hard work, but really enjoyable and a great product at the end of it. So I think John had been immensely frustrated in his role at IGN, working in Europe and the UK, by the fact that in those parts of the world, iodine nutrition was really lagging, and yet in many low-income countries and much of the developing world, iodine deficiency was a problem that had largely been solved by iodized salt. And I remember one particular occasion showing sort of a statistical somebody's list of top 10 iodine deficient countries, and there was the UK ranking right behind Angola, which is not really where he felt it should have belonged. So I think did an enormous service to really everybody in the UK, everybody in Europe who may be struggling with iodine deficiency, and bringing this to attention, not always with great success at the national level in the UK and getting things shifted, but I think it did really start getting iodized salt on the shelves for the first time in the UK in recent years. And I would maybe close by noting that people know his work on iodine nutrition from a mechanistic perspective, from an epidemiologic perspective. People may not know his 2017 work published in the journal Thyroid on iodine and malt whiskey, one of his obviously major contributions. I think the conclusion of the paper was that perhaps iodized salt was a better source as a public health measure. So John, great pleasure to be with you. It's been such a pleasure to work with you all these years.
Thanks very much indeed, Elizabeth. And John, I don't know whether you have any comments that you'd like to make. I mean, the importance of iodine is still recognized today, and the fact that iodine deficiency is still an issue, particularly during pregnancy.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne, and thank you to all the colleagues for such nice accounts. It just so happens that a national dietary survey about nutrition was published in June in the UK, and it showed that the iodine levels were dropping compared to when I was involved, so that we're, I think, above not just Angola, or below not just Angola, but a lot of places. And this has caused my colleague Peter Taylor to write a letter to the Lancet, which is just going through at the moment, indicating this and drawing attention to politicians and so on. So I'm very pleased you did that, Elizabeth. And I won't go through all the talks, but again, I'm almost speechless at the contributions I made. So Thank you very much, and I look forward to the future to see whether we can get this iodine thing sorted. It's very difficult in the EU because everybody's got different legislation, believe it or not.
Sure, sure. So obviously it's still a problem, John, and as you say, it's an area in which you've made a huge contribution. But we're going to now go to another area where you made an amazing contribution, and we're going to talk about the CAT study. And we're very delighted to welcome a colleague of ours from Cardiff, Professor Alid Rees, who's going to tell us about the CAT study. So Alid, over to you.
Well, many thanks indeed, Marion, and to everybody who's organised this wonderful webinar. It's a real pleasure to be able to follow such a wonderful series of talks and contribute in my own small way to this tribute to John. My task in the next few minutes is to take us through this wonderful programme of research that John has established, which is the CAT study. Next slide, please. So I'm sure everybody on this call will be very familiar with it, but I'll remind you this was set up in the early 2000s on the back of observational studies which had shown that children born to mothers with low thyroid hormone levels were reported to have reduced cognitive function. Now, it's a major endeavour. It was supported by the Wellcome Trust, and the trial recruited approximately 22,000 women in Wales and Italy between 2002 and 2006. The mothers were screened at a median of 12 weeks and 3 days gestation and were randomly assigned to screen or control groups, with the screen group having their thyroid function tests done immediately and the control group having thyroid function measured after birth. Women with a free T4 below the 2.5th percentile and or with a TSH above the 97.5th percentile were classed as having suboptimal gestational thyroid function, with the screen group treated with levothyroxine at a relatively high starting dosage of 150 micrograms, but adjusted thereafter to a target TSH of 0.1 to 1. The primary outcome of the study was the IQ of the offspring at age 3 years. The study was published, a seminal publication to this day really, in the New England Journal of Medicine, and the conclusion was that antenatal screening and maternal treatment for hypothyroidism did not result in improved cognitive function in children at 3 years of age. Next slide, please, Joe. So CATS2 then followed on from that, and the rationale for that was, well, maybe we've got it wrong. Maybe IQ at age 3 is not a particularly reliable measure of longer-term cognition, or maybe that the negative results, which were obviously observed also in subsequent studies in the KC1, for example, that the intervention was too late. Both trials had a relatively late starting dose of levothyroxine. Tribute here goes to Marion and colleagues for leading on CATS2, which was supported by the Charles Wolfson Trust, Action Medical Research, and the ATA. And the primary aim of CATS2 was to revisit cognitive function at age 9 years using a more comprehensive battery of tests. And we can see the flow chart in the right here, which summarizes the CATS program to that point. Importantly, it also included mothers with normal gestational thyroid function, and it was also able to explore the effects of overtreatment. I'll remind you that the starting dose was relatively high. The study explored the effects on mother and offspring body composition, cardiovascular function, and metabolic measures. And we also explored the effects on child behavior through 3 validated questionnaires, so Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, or SDQ, the Child ADHD Questionnaire, and the Social Communication Questionnaire, or SCQ. So more comprehensive range of assessments done, and a tribute to Charlie Hales, who led a lot of this work as part of her PhD. Next slide, please. So what are the main findings from this series of publications that followed on from the original CATS study? So the headline one, I suppose, was that maternal thyroxine during pregnancy didn't improve child cognition at age 9.5 years, confirming the results of CATS1. Levothyroxine supplementation of women with suboptimal gestational thyroid function didn't also affect long-term offspring anthropometric, bone, or cardiometabolic measurements. But the absence of treatment was associated with sustained long-term increase in body mass index and fat mass in women with suboptimal gestational thyroid function, as we can see from the figure here on the right. In the top 2 elements there's a divergence in those bell-shaped curves, skewed in the untreated population, who of course would have been treated at some stage after pregnancy, and they didn't have levothyroxine supplementation at an earlier stage. So it's really informative with respect to the natural history of suboptimal gestational thyroid function. There was no overall association between SGTF and offspring ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or behavior questionnaire scores, but children of overtreated mothers were found to display significantly more ADHD symptoms and behavioral difficulties than those of normal gestational thyroid function mothers. So the conclusion and take-home message from that piece of work was that thyroxine supplementation during pregnancy requires close monitoring to avoid overtreatment. Next slide, please. So moving on then to the latest set of studies, which is CATS3, this time funded by the Waterloo Foundation, where we sought to establish whether adolescent brain morphology and white matter microstructure, and macrostructure for that matter, were affected by suboptimal gestational thyroid function. The children for this set of studies were aged between 11 and 16, and they underwent T1 weighted structural MRI, diffusion MRI, and quantitative magnetization transfer imaging, or QMT, to interrogate myelin. There were 4 groups that were recruited, relatively equal numbers from each of untreated SGTF, normal gestational thyroid function, or treated, whether optimally or overtreated. And as we can see in this figure in the right-hand panel here, which looks at global brain tissue volumes within each treatment group shown on the x-axis, regardless of which aspect of brain tissue volumes at a macrostructural level, there were no significant differences. Next slide, please. And one more onto that one, that's great. So untreated, so if we can go back one, sorry. That's great. Untreated suboptimal gestational thyroid function was, however, associated with higher mean diffusivity, indicating reduced axonal integrity than normal gestational thyroid function within the inferior longitudinal fasciculus, which is a major white matter tract connecting the occipital and temporal lobes and involved in several cognitive functions. So shown in this pretty picture on the right, I always like looking at these reconstructions of the tracts, which we selected a priori because they were implicated in some previous imaging studies to be involved in neurodevelopmental outcomes. And the tracts that we studied were in the corpus callosum in panel A, the cingulum in panel B, and then each of the inferior and superior longitudinal fasciculi in panels C and D. Next slide, please. Just one more figure on this slide, if you can. Thank you. And I won't take you all through this, but panel B in the top right is the significant difference there with respect to the inferior longitudinal fasciculus specifically, demonstrating that higher mean diffusivity. So untreated suboptimal gestational thyroid function in this particular study was associated with altered tract-specific microstructural morphology in adolescents, which may be reversible with levothyroxine administration in pregnancy, hinting perhaps that we've got a measure which is more sensitive than IQ in early life to the effects of thyroid hormone replacement and thyroid status on the developing brain. Next slide, please. So that leads us nicely into CATS4. The legacy continues, and this is a study which we're very pleased to announce has just been accepted for funding again by the Waterloo Foundation, which will evaluate routinely collected health and educational attainment data in the offspring of more than 14,000 mothers in Wales who participated in the CATS study. We've got a high retention of people in Wales. Once you come to Wales, you don't leave. It's a beautiful country to live. And one of the benefits of that is that we can follow the 14,000 or so, give or take, a few hundred perhaps, of the original mothers who are still living here. And the aims of this particular study will be to determine whether maternal antenatal thyroid screening and correction of thyroid dysfunction in pregnancy is associated with any improvement in educational attainment in the offspring up to school leaving stage by looking at GCSE results, and also to interrogate whether correction of thyroid dysfunction is associated with a reduced risk of the child developing any neurodevelopmental disorder. And to do that, we will link the CATS randomized trial maternal thyroid function data with routinely collected offspring educational attainment and health records through the SAIL databank, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with that resource, is a national data repository for Wales, which facilitates anonymized linkage of multiple health, education, and social care data sets. So with that, I'll draw my presentation to a close. Thank you very much indeed, John, for your fantastic commitment in setting up this trial, which has generated a very rich and clinically impactful set of data. So the story continues. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Alid. That was super. And John, I'm sure you'd like to say something.
I just want to make one comment, Marion. The design of the original cat study would not have occurred without my colleague Sir Nicholas Wald, FRS, who is professor in Barts in London of epidemiology, community medicine, and so on. So we'll leave it at that.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much, John. And we're going to welcome Ulla Felt Rasmussen to just talk a little bit about the cat study or maybe some other things, because she's just shared a very nice photo. Ulla, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you
Thank
see me?
Ulla.
Because I'm not, the video is not on. Let me see if it works or not. It does.
Yep. Now we see you as well. Now we see you as well.
All right, fine. Thank you. And first of all, thank you very much, Marion, for including me in this fantastic tribute to John. And John, it's really been a privilege to know you. I can't really recollect exactly how many years we've known each other, but it's definitely more than 40. I'm pretty sure. My first ETA meeting was in 1977, and well, I don't know exactly when we met, but we have had a lot of joint discussions over the years. And this photo that I brought in was from the ETA Jubilee meeting in Athens in May 2005, which was actually the meeting of the birth of the ETA, because it was, you could say, the idea was birthed before it was actually launched a couple of years later. But at that meeting, Folge, my husband, actually took this photo of those that were present, of the past presidents and secretaries. And I have circled your head as with blue, so you can see you were part of it. Certainly someone had died over the years, and actually two of those on the photos in the middle, Wilma Wiesinger and myself, we were actual president and secretary at the time. But my task was eventually to take over the secretary treasurer post after you, John. And you remember that was in Gothenburg at the ETA meeting, and we had to exchange all the paperwork from the previous years in order to try and maintain the archives, which have later been sorted. And well, it was, of course, a privilege to take over from you, but I realized when I stepped in after you that it was really a lot of work to be both secretary and treasurer. And Wilma Wiesinger and I turned it into a different setting afterwards, having split the two and also including a standing office, as you know. But you and I were both secretary and treasurer at the ETA before a lot of more people were involved in a standing office. So I also once had a very nice task of being co-reviewer of a thesis in Stockholm, particularly on thyroid and pregnancy. And just to go a little bit to the cat studies, like Alid, I will only comment my really appreciation to you and admiration that you set up this study, because this is really a difficult task. And when the results didn't come out quite clear, you've just stubbornly and persistently set up future other studies continuing in this aspect in the same group, and involved, as you also said, involving all of your people in Cardiff to take part of it and to bring it further. And I think this is really, really a very, very big task that has to be complemented by all of us, apart from all of the other complements that you need. So I would just end by saying thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a colleague. Thank you for meeting us whenever. And we're still planning to come by Cardiff as soon as we can get a tour by car around UK. So we'll let you know.
That's lovely. Thanks very much indeed, Ula. And I think we now need to go to the person who's going to have the final word in this webinar, and that's Professor Colin Diane, who's also in Cardiff, who's just going to round off this webinar with a few words. Colin, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. Well, there's not really much more I can add to everything that's been said, though I have noticed that as the last 30 years of ETA secretaries, 5 out of the 6 are here. And that's a tribute to you, John, for the legacy that you've left. I also have one personal memory, which is I came to your fellowship in 2008 before I became professor in 2010. And I saw the 250 publications you had at that time. I thought, I will never have that number. I've got close to it, but you've carried on. So, and this has all been achieved, John, when you didn't technically have an academic appointment, you were working with the NHS. So how you achieved all of that, I will never, ever understand. But it's an absolutely wonderful legacy, which everybody is proud of here. I was wondering whether, is Julia going to join us, Marion, for a comment?
Yes, I'm sure. Julia is still here. Here she is, Julia.
So I thought it'd be appropriate for her to round off with a note on what you've done for patients. And I can certainly say that in my clinic, I still have people saying I was looked after by Professor Lazarus with a smile on their face. So I know that there's been a very strong legacy, both for your research and your clinical practice. But Julia, would you like to make some final comments?
Thank you, Colin, and thank you everybody who's taken part. And we too get messages, emails and letters from people who remember being looked after by John in various ways over the years. John's contribution to the BTF, which is what I can speak of in particular, is immense, and the charity just wouldn't have been able to make the connections with medical advisors and scientists over the years to develop our standing and our influence in the thyroid world, and to help as many patients as we have done. So thank you very much, John. Thank you to everybody who's joined today. Thank you to the audience for joining us this evening, and particularly to Marion and Prem, who've organised this tremendous meeting and made sure that as many people as possible could be a part of it. And finally, thank you to John. You're not on the screen at the moment, but I know your support for the BTF goes on, and clearly for many of your colleagues and the work you do too. So, you know, we'll all be forever grateful. Thank you. There you are.
Say something if you would. John, say something.
Well, I just repeat my honor at being part of this, and thanks to all the contributors who've condensed a huge amount of information into a very short space of time, and that's to be commended. Thank you. And it's nice to see the CAT study in its different forms going on from here, and I wish them well in their endeavors. But lastly, but not leastly, thank you to Julia and Marion and Kuera Premawardena for taking on this gargantuan task, which they've succeeded in very well. It's a pity we don't have another hour, but we don't. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to be involved. Thank you.